Okay, we're about to dive into some stories that are so twisted, you'd think they were straight out of a horror movie. But they're not. They're real. We're talking about America's most terrifying cults, and we're going to explore the chilling reality of how these things even happen. You know, it almost always starts with a promise, right? A promise of faith, a sense of community, of purpose. I mean, that's something we all look for. But in the stories we're about to get into, that promise, it's just bait. It's a lure that twists that hope into a weapon of absolute fear. And that faith, well, it leads to this incredibly powerful, almost blinding trust. You see people just hand over everything, their lives, their hopes, their entire futures, to one charismatic leader. But that trust, it's weaponized. It's slowly forged into this cage of total, inescapable control. So that leads us to the big, haunting question here. How does this happen? How does someone's deepest devotion, their search for a better life, somehow lead them down a path that ends in tragedy and even death? The answers, well, they're not simple and they're really disturbing. All right, first up, the classic nightmares. We're going to start with the two stories that basically burned the idea of a dangerous cult into the American psyche. I mean, these are the names you've definitely heard of, and for all the worst reasons. So our first leader is a man who literally promised paradise, Jim Jones. As the head of the People's Temple, he wasn't just some preacher, oh no. To his followers, he was a savior. He was incredibly charismatic, super persuasive, and his solution to all of life's problems was simple and powerful. Just follow me. Yeah, I can create heaven on earth. That was his promise. And it was powerful enough to convince hundreds of people from all walks of life to give up everything for a ticket to this supposed heaven he was building, just for them. But that heaven he promised, it wasn't in some idyllic place. It was in the remote jungles of Guyana, and it quickly turned into a hellish prison. And this number tells the story of how that promise ended. Over 900 people, men, women, and children, died in the settlement that he named after himself, Jonestown. I mean, can you imagine a more ultimate betrayal? After completely isolating his followers from the entire world, Jones orchestrated this final, horrific loyalty test. He forced them, men, women, and even little kids, to drink poisoned punch. It was a mass murder-suicide on a scale America had never, ever seen before. While Jim Jones was building his utopia out in the jungle, another charismatic figure was gathering followers right in the middle of 1960s California. He came out of that whole counterculture movement, but he was a totally different kind of monster. His name, of course, was Charles Manson. See, Manson didn't just lead a cult, he commanded a family of completely devoted, mostly young followers. He wasn't just preaching some philosophy, he was ordering them to kill. He was the mastermind behind the brutal murder of Sharon Tate and others, all part of this twisted plan to kickstart a chaotic, apocalyptic race war that he called Helter Skelter. And this quote, "Some men leave a mark on history. Manson left a scar on the soul of America." Wow. That just captures it perfectly, doesn't it? His crimes didn't just end lives. They totally shattered the country's sense of safety, of innocence. He became this symbol of pure, motiveless evil and left a scar that's still there. Okay, next up, faith, fire, and the end. Now, we're going to look at two very different groups that were tied together by one incredibly powerful belief, that the end of the world was coming, and coming soon. And this apocalyptic vision, well, it drove both of them toward a final, fiery tragedy. Let's head to Waco, Texas. There, a man named Vernon Howell basically reinvents himself as David Koresh. He starts claiming he's a prophet, the only one who can unlock the Bible's final secrets. He gathers his flock, the Branch Davidians, at their compound, Mount Carmel, to get ready for the apocalypse. And what happened next was one of the most intense, drawn-out standoffs in American history. It all kicked off on day 1 with a botched ATF raid over firearms. By day 10, tense negotiations were underway, but going nowhere. By day 40, they're using psychological tactics, trying to wear them down. And then, on day 51, the FBI launches a final assault and a fire erupts, consuming everything. The result was just a national tragedy. 76 people died in that fire. That includes David Koresh and just, heartbreakingly, more than 20 children. Those images of Mount Carmel just engulfed in flames, they absolutely shocked the world.
And this is the question that still hangs over Waco. Was this the inevitable end of a cult's delusion, or was it a catastrophic mistake by the government? I mean, who's really to blame for the fire and the deaths? To this day, people fiercely debate the answer. So, while the Branch Davidians were looking to the Bible for the end times, our next group was looking up, to the stars. Meet Marshall Applewhite, the leader of Heaven's Gate. This was a really strange cult that kind of mixed Christian ideas with a heavy dose of science fiction. And their core belief was, well, it was out there. Applewhite convinced his followers that their bodies weren't really them. They were just temporary vehicles or containers. To get to salvation, which they called the next level, they had to ditch these bodies. And how were they going to do that? They believed an alien spaceship was their ticket, and it was hiding right behind the Hale-Bopp comet. So in 1997, the world was stunned by this number, 39. That's how many members committed a meticulously planned mass suicide so they could shed their earthly forms and board that spaceship. The final scene was just chilling. They were found in a mansion, all dressed in identical outfits with their bags packed, ready to go. Just so bizarre. Okay, so it's easy to think of cults as these weird, isolated groups out in some remote compound, right? But our final case study shows how they've evolved. Now they can hide in plain sight. They can be disguised as something totally modern and even aspirational. This is the cult next door. Take the group NKXVM. On the surface, it just looks like one of those modern self-help groups, promising empowerment and success. But under that corporate-looking veneer was a really sinister process. Step 1 was the promise. We can make you better. Then came step 2, the isolation, slowly cutting you off from your friends, your family, anyone on the outside. Step 3 was the collateral. They'd gather blackmail material on you, damaging secrets to make sure you'd never leave or talk. And the final, absolutely horrifying step, the branding, where women were literally physically branded like cattle as a sign of ownership. And that's the thing. When the promise of empowerment hides a nightmare, trust becomes your enemy. NKXVM is terrifying proof that the desire for self-improvement can be a mask for an absolute nightmare of abuse and control. It's a stark reminder that in these situations, the trust you freely give becomes the very weapon they use against you. So let's bring this all together for a modern warning. What do all of these horrifying stories have in common? They're more than just history lessons, right? They're a timeless warning. Because it doesn't matter if it's in a jungle in Guyana, on a ranch in Texas, or in a slick seminar room, the playbook is always the same. It's about the abuse of power, the psychology of control, and the absolutely devastating consequences of blind devotion. From the poison punch in Jonestown to the branding iron of NXCVM, every one of these stories is just a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can all be. They show how that search for meaning, for purpose, can be so easily manipulated, and how belief itself can be twisted into a deadly weapon. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Which one of these stories terrified you the most? And what does that say about that razor-thin line between faith and fear?